there folks, John here with Through My Lens, and today I'm coming to you with a knife comparison review. Now, nearly 6 years ago, about 5.5 years ago, I did a video. It's one of the most popular videos here on the channel. I think to date it's had over 30,000 views. I was one of the first to compare the zero tolerance ZT0562CF with the Hinderer XM-18. Again, I did that almost 6 years ago. Recently picked up another XM-18, a Gen 6, and I wanted to see how it compared to the ZT0562. Wanted to revisit this topic since there have been some changes and some updates to the Hinderer model. And let me just say that this is the same ZT0562 that I showed in that original video. I actually have two of them. Check this out. Not only do you see that this is an original one that has the M390, they're in 20 CV blade steel right now, which is nearly chemically identical, but this one is M390. Look at that serial number, would you? 390. How about that? Isn't that cool? Really nice collector. I have carried and used this a ton over the last few years. If you think the blade looks just pristine, it's because I had it replaced about 6 months ago at ZT, and they did replace it with M390 blade steel, and they did allow me to keep that that serial number, the 390 serial number, which I was really tickled about. But I've got a ton of experience with this knife. The XM-18 I've got a lot of experience with. The Gen 6 I just got a few days ago. You'll see I did a review, a standalone review on this one a few days ago here on the channel. But I, again, wanted to compare it as I've had several Hinderer XM-18s, probably 5 or 6. I've had 3-inchers, I've had 3.5-inch ones like this one. I've had XM-24s. So I feel pretty comfortable. And, you know, I've got a definite opinion here. So let's get started. When, again, back in the fall of 2015, when the zero tolerance ZT0562 came out, it rocked the knife world because it was so good. Many people, including myself, did a comparison between these two knives, and there were a lot of people who called this knife the better knife. For three main reasons. One, the detent on the, I think that was the Generation 3 or Generation 4 XM-18s was weaker, so that you could deploy this with thumb stud very easily as well as a flipper tab. And it used a phosphorus bronze pivot. And the 0562 used Kai's new at that time, their new KVT bearing system. That combined with a stronger detent makes this knife one of the best flippers on the market, whether you're talking about production or you know, it even competes with a lot of custom ones, just in terms of being a fantastic flipper. It really has a wonderful flipping action. If you know, if a flipping action that jets out and is kind of nice and fidgety, that you can repeatedly do, if that's something important to you, this is one of the best out there. In terms of other enhancements that the knife had, the XM-18 did not. They had the steel lock bar inserts. I believe the 0562 was one of the first production models from Zero Tolerance to incorporate that particular innovation, and of course it's been used on a lot of knives by a lot of different makers since then. And of course, as we all know, the reason for it is to prevent lock stick and avoid a titanium on titanium interface between the lock bar and the frame. That steel insert prevents that, and is considered a great technical improvement. And again, the other thing that was technically superior to this knife, to the old XM-18, was the blade steel. Again, M390, it now uses 20 CV. At the time, the Hinderer XM-18 used S35VN, which great steel, but considered by most to be a step or two below 20 CV. Looking at the Gen 6 now, in addition to keeping all the other things that make a Hinderer XM-18 great, and do check out my review of this knife. I posted it just a few days ago. I've had this one for about a week or so now, and really enjoying it. But there are some innovations, some leaps forward in this knife that the previous models did not have. One, Rick, of course, incorporated the tri-way system. If you take a look at the flipper tab, you can see that symbol indicative of this being a tri-way model. That particular pivot system allows you to use whatever system you want in the pivot. If you want phosphorus bronze, if you want nylon, if you want a bearing system, you have those options. I did keep the factory, it comes from the factory with the bearings in it, and it does flip fantastically. Very, very similar to this knife. The detent is just a hair stronger. And I don't know if, again, this is, I've had this one for over 5 years. Is this one a little more worn in, more broken in? I don't think so. I mean, bearings won't really wear into titanium, I don't think. So there's not really much to wear in, I don't think. So I really think that this knife just has a little bit stiffer detent. The flipper tab is also designed just a little bit differently. You'll see that this kind of comes up in more of an acute horn, kind of pokey, where this is more rounded. And if you're going to flip it all day and play with it, this one's more comfortable for sure. If you're wearing gloves and you want to make sure you don't slip off the flipper tab, you definitely want this one. No question. Similarly, from an ergonomics perspective, this is a much better knife if you are going to be wearing gloves, or if, as old Nick Shabazz says, if you're working in the Vaseline factory. A lot of very, very aggressive jimping. You can see it's in the lock bar. All kinds of places to help you hang on to this knife. A few features also that the 0562 does not have is it has the finger choil there, which I've come to really appreciate from a sharpening perspective. This one is going to be so much easier to sharpen without damaging it than this one, because especially on a system like the Work Sharp, it is really easy to get too far up into that belt and damage, and start doing some rubbing on in here, or other knives that don't have a finger choil or a sharpening choil. You can actually bump up in here into the frame area. So I do appreciate a choil much more so than I used to. Kind of sad in some ways that the XM-18 does have this stronger detent, because it's much harder to use the thumb studs now to deploy. You can. It's really stiff. You can do it in both directions. Takes a little practice. And I do want to say this is breaking in somewhat and getting a little bit easier to use, because this was harder to do before. So you can thumb stud deploy it. It's just quite a bit harder than it used to be because of that detent. But it can be done. If there are certain situations where I think I would prefer the XM-18 as a concealed carry permit holder over this knife. One, it does not have a deep carry pocket clip. That means, yes, it's going to stick out and show a little bit more. Not a problem. Usually as a concealed carry permit holder, I'm wearing a longer shirt or some sort of covering garment, so you're not going to see what's in my pockets anyway. And because this is not deep carry, it's going to protrude out a little bit more from the pocket, and it's going to be easier to grasp when I do need to, if I should, need to extract the knife from a defensive purpose, such as if somebody's trying to go for my gun while we're scuffling and I need to use the knife to deter them from trying to take my gun. Conversely, if I am in a situation where, and this is really not likely for me and how I carry a knife, because if I'm going to the office, this is probably going into my pocket. It's not going to be clipped to my pocket. But in a situation where I did want to be a little bit more subtle and not be so obvious about carrying a knife and it's showing, and I obviously the deep carry clip will conceal it more. But if I was concerned about that, I would probably just drop it down in my pocket anyway. So, you know, again, a little bit more of a situational difference depending on how you want to use and carry the knife, where this may be an advantage over this pocket clip and vice versa. But for my purposes, I'm probably going to like the XM-18 from a concealed carry permit holder standpoint. Likewise, this one's going to have a little bit better, slightly, ergonomics for me from a grip and hanging onto the knife standpoint because of that nice aggressive G10. You can buy aftermarket handle scales for the ZT0562, the ZT0562CF that are more aggressive than this slick CF, but nobody does G10 better than Hinderer. Quite honestly, I've always really liked his G10, both from a functional standpoint and from an aesthetic standpoint. There are other aesthetic cues, such as these screws here. They have a reflective quality that other hardware has never been able to match. Similarly on the back. Just a few things that give this an edge, in my mind, a minor edge over the ZT0562. From most respects, they're going to be dead even, and for a lot of people, this is going to be the better knife because it is quite a bit cheaper at $260 retail, and ZT does use MAP pricing now, so that's pretty much what you can expect to buy it from a dealer. This one's going to be $425, but when you consider the advantages that it has as a concealed carry permit holder, as well as the uniqueness, the ability to make it yours with aesthetic aspects, like, you know, I bought some from Hinderer, these anodized back spacers. I've got in one of the lock bar protectors here, these discs that prevent you from hyperextending the lock bar. I've got an anodized one of those coming as well. When you consider the individualization and customization that you can do, when you consider the legendary Hinderer name and how well respected this knife is in the knife community, it's worth the asking price, and it does edge out with the new Gen 6 upgrades. It does edge out the ZT0562 just a little bit. But I'm certainly not getting rid of my ZT0562. Love this knife. It has its own unique aesthetic that I really appreciate. It is a little more slender. If I do want to carry it in the pocket and not clipped, I'm probably going to grab this one. It is maybe about a half an ounce lighter in weight. I did weigh them, and this one's just a hair lighter. So between being thinner and lighter, this one's a little bit easier to carry into the office. Not much, but a little bit. And it is just a fabulous knife, and it is a little bit easier if you want to play. It's going to be easier on your fingers and on your hand if you want to sit there and play with it and flip it. So it does have that advantage as well. So two great knives. I'm so happy that Zero Tolerance still supports this knife. That's the thing that makes this probably one of the best knives that Zero Tolerance makes, if not one of the best production knives out there. This being something I consider to be semi-custom. But the fact that this is an evergreen knife that has stayed in production in ZT's catalog for so long that I can send the knife in, I can get the blade replaced if I want, I can get replacement components, and that's the same thing with Hinderer and the XM-18. I'm not buying any more limited edition stuff. I've got a few examples of that, and those are knives that I don't really want to use because I can't get replacement parts. I can't get the blades refinished from the manufacturer. They're just not supported. And unfortunately, in recent years, ZT has gotten more into the limited edition kind of game, appealing to collectors and in some cases speculators. But the 0562 remains well supported, and I think is a knife that everybody should own. So there you have it. There's my thoughts on the XM-18 versus the ZT0562. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Take care. God bless. We'll see you in the next one. I hope you've enjoyed this production from the Through My Lens YouTube channel. If you did, please click on the like button and do share the video on social media. If you'd like to see more content like it, please do subscribe to the channel, follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and do check out Through My Lens at www.throughmylens.org.